Hey, my name's ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co. Today we're going to review Matrix Resurrection. So this is a film by Lara Wachowski, the original director of the Matrix series. She before was with her brother, I think, or sister, I'm not sure. I remember one of them is trans, I think. I don't know what the story is exactly, but originally the Wachowski brothers, now it's just one director, so you're like, I don't know what happened to the brother or sister, why they weren't in the film as well, so that's kind of interesting. Time is 2 hours, 28 minutes. Actors are Keanu Reeves as Neo and Thomas Anderson. Carrie-Anne plays Trinity or Tiffany. Yahya Abdul-Mateen 2 plays Morpheus and also Agent Smith. Jonathan Groff plays Smith. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know if they got these right in IMDb. Jessica Henwick plays Bugs. Neil Patrick Harris plays the Analyst. Jada Pinkett Smith plays Niobe. So the story is Mr. Anderson is a top game designer of a game called The Matrix, and he constantly has these hallucinations that he actually lives inside the game called The Matrix. And then it turns out he's approached by this team and gets introduced to the real world, which is, kind of pulls it together with the other three Matrices. He discovers that Trinity is locked into the game still, and he wants to pull her out into the real world. But the world is quite different because at the end of Matrix 3, there was kind of this peace treaty between the machines and Neo to fight Mr. Smith. So they kind of, I don't think they transitioned right from what I can understand. The whole film feels like basically a lazy remake of Matrix 1. There's a lot of reuse of Matrix 1 material. We actually splice it into the film and suggest that's the video game version versus the real Matrix, so that's a little strange. That just felt super lazy, or they were out of ideas. I don't know, they're just phoning in the material, just a little bit strange. At the same time, they have a lot of different costumes that aren't consistent with the original Matrix, so you have new costumes that stick out and don't really blend with the original Matrix. And then you have excessive camera use, very similar to the same exact shots in Matrix 1. So you're like, I don't know what they're trying to accomplish here. It's like lazy camera shots and then no nude camera shots. The costumes aren't consistent with the original Matrix, so it doesn't feel like the Matrix per se. The way bullet time works is different than it worked in the Matrix 1, 2, and 3, which is kind of silly to do that. There's this new bullet time that the Analyst came up with, which is it kind of freezes in between bullet time, and Neo is not unable to work with that. In general, it's just a weak storyline. Within Matrix 4, a lot of the points don't really come together and make sense. There's one of the points that really don't make sense is there's no phone booths. Obviously, we're living in an era of cell phones, and so obviously all the phone booths are taken away, so it's hard to do a new Matrix within that understanding of the phone booth logic to get out of the Matrix, so it kind of breaks one of the major points. The first three films. So they suggest there's this technology called portals, but there's no explanation how they work. And if they're difficult to use, it seems like they can just pop in and out. There's no challenge at all. So that kind of takes away one of the major tension points within the Matrix, because the machines are always fighting the Matrix team to get to the next phone booth or hardline. In this case, they don't have to find any hardline, they just pop in and out. So there's literally no challenge and no tension. So they've taken away one of the major tension points. So they're never really any danger, so it kind of makes the form really boring. Probably why I started falling asleep. I literally fell asleep almost 3 times in this film. I had to wake myself up. I was like, no, stay awake. You got to evaluate the film, right? If it was a film I wasn't reviewing, I might have just slept through it. The weird thing, too, is they're reusing all these camera shots from the Matrix 1, but then the other way of filming is inconsistent with the Matrix 1, 2, and 3. So they're inconsistent with the filming style, but then they reuse a lot of the film shots from the first one. So it feels like laziness blended with stuff that isn't consistent with the original Matrix. So it's a really strange mix of camera shots that none of it makes sense. It feels like lazy mixed in with new stuff that doesn't consistent with the rest. There's a reuse of the Angry General similar to the Matrix 3, but this time it's Niobe instead of the mayor of the town. There's also this new city called Io instead of Zion. So apparently they abandoned Zion and they moved to Io, which kind of doesn't make sense because the machines would have been watching the whole time. So how did they move a whole civilization to a new settlement and escape the machines at the same time? Because the machines are always trying to crack in to get into Zion. So you're like, that's a huge plot hole, right? You have robots that are actually helping the humans at the same time, so that also doesn't make any sense because they would be super smart. There are a lot of cool different beings that they invented in this game, or really cool digitally effect, but it doesn't really make sense as far as the logic from Matrix 1, 2, and 3, where the machines were all against you, and the only thing you had is kind of these simple computers that the humans were able to use, And now they have these super advanced robots that work with them. You're like, why would they work against their own kinds? That kind of doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's possible, but it doesn't make sense with the first Matrix 1, 2, and 3. At the end of the film, they use the song Rage Against the Machine, which is also one of the Matrix, which is a great song. But they use a cover band, which is like, why would you use a cover band instead of you have Rage Against the Machine? Just reuse the original music or do a female metal band, but don't use a female cover band of the same music. You're like, oh, it's so, ugh. Like, it's just like, it just seems like really lazy. Like, oh, we couldn't afford to get Rage Against the Machine, so we'll just reuse a cover band. Like, that's what you do in a B film. Like, you're using it for the first time. Not like, you know, you're a major studio production, you just reuse this. It's just, it doesn't make sense. It makes it too soft, I think. There's no good transition, I think, from Matrix 3 to Matrix 4. There's a lot of gaps between that. They kind of bring it a little bit full circle in the end where they go and rescue Trinity from the machines, but it just makes it so simple. And they, as they're explaining it, they're actually breaking in, so there's no tension of how they get to Trinity. So you're like, well, that was a huge thing where you think, oh, everything's going to fall apart. No, everything runs smooth to plan. Like, you can't run a film where everything runs smooth to plan. It's boring, right? So it's just like terrible. And they have a hunt scene where they're hunted down, and Trinity says she had a vision of it, but just, I don't know, just not good. She talks about the dream when they could have just flashed the dream visually and explained it versus telling it. So not really good in that aspect. A lot of the characters have aged too much. Niobe's really old. She's not really old, but they aged her artificially older. Same with Neo and Trinity. And it's like, why would they have this true flame after 40 years or whatever, how old they are supposed to be in this film? Like, they're supposed to be in their 60s or something. But you're like, I mean, I know people in their 60s, 70s, they're good partners, but the love goes way down. It's not like that passionate love before, so it doesn't make any sense between 3 when you see like Neo and Trinity like in their 30s or whatever, are supposed to be in their 30s and just passionate love affair, and then they're going to be in their 60s and be like, hey, by the way, Grandpa, oh, Grandma, we still love each other. You're like, okay. I don't know, that's just not too exciting to see Grandma and Grandpa get back together. Yeah, and the feeling I got from this film was it's kind of like the same what happened to Star Wars. You had 1, 2, and 3. No one liked it by George Lucas because there had been like this 20-year gap between Empire or Return of the Jedi, and then he did a 1, 2, and 3, and it was kind of like there was a little bit of style inconsistency, but it was all better, right? Better special effects, better everything. That's what Lucas always drove. And you felt like in this film they just kind of went like 1, 2, 3 for Matrix, and then 4 is like it's just an average action movie kind of. Like, I felt like an average director could have done this versus using the original Matrix director. Should have been like cutting edge everything, and you're like, it's not really cutting edge. You're like, and the also thing, it just had that Disney feel of when Disney took over Star Wars and you're just like went in this weird direction. You're like, what are you doing? Just remake of everything? This feels like a remake of everything in the Matrix. Just like, let's do another film and make more money. You're like, oh no, you gotta have a good story, not remake it just for the money, right? So I felt like everyone got broke and then they couldn't afford their Lamborghinis, and so they remade this film. Versus the first trilogy is so great and a great philosophy and everything, and it's like one of my favorite series of all time, but I definitely won't buy this and add this to my collection of Matrix 1, 2, and 3. I might see it again, but there's also no betrayal between the team members. The first Matrix had this great betrayal. I forget the character, but it was such a great betrayal, and they have kind of a little bit of suggestion with Neo eating steak, but Neo's just accidentally not betraying, he just doesn't know he's in this Matrix, right? Because he's been fooled by the computers, apparently. And the other thing I didn't really like was they had this guy, the Analyst. And I like him as an actor, but it didn't compare at all to the Architect in the original Matrix 3, or I think he might have been introduced in Matrix 2 as well. But that was just so much better than this guy playing the Analyst. You're just like, okay, this guy's supposed to be smarter than the Architect. It just doesn't make any sense. And then they're talking about they're going to reboot the whole Matrix, and then he's not even in control of it. You're like, so he's way down, and the Architect, and you're like, what is going on? Why didn't they bring in the original Architect? Would have made more sense. Did that guy die off, or did they not want to hire him? Just like that guy could have been old. It would have been fine, you know, like an older, wise guy would make sense. But I don't know, maybe he's just too old to play the part. I don't know. They didn't bring back the original Morpheus, which is kind of a betrayal to that character actor who played that. They played this new guy who plays all the same parts of Morpheus, and you're just like, this is super blech. You know, not using the original Morpheus. Maybe he was just too old to play that part. Could have been possible that he wasn't fast enough to do all of the martial arts. Could have been possible. It definitely felt a little slower on some of the characters for some of the fight scenes. I think they did a pretty good job, but you didn't feel like they were up to top shape. I mean, obviously it's like 10, 20 years later, so obviously they're in their 50s, portraying like they're still in their 30s. That's going to be a hard thing to do. The weird thing too is when Neo comes back and he first joins the humanity in a spaceship, like he goes into the kung fu fighting scenario and he goes in there and he's like, oh, you don't want to mess with me, and they're kind of fighting and Morpheus is kind of kicking his ass, and all of a sudden he's just like, at the end he's like, boom, I'm tougher than you, and so he literally relearns. He jumps in this huge level instead of just learning a little bit like the Matrix 1. He just immediately jumps to the superstardom. But then later he can't fly in the film, so you're like, can't fly, but he can do this. You're just like, is he the one anymore? This is so bad. Yeah, just a lot of plot holes. You're always falling asleep. I guess you can go see it. I don't know. I mean, it's better, this type of film, in the cinema, I guess, than on your TV, but I don't know. It is what it is. If you'd like to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you on the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.